this week's episode of Your Business Unleashed is a pretty exciting one. We've got another founder with us of another FinTech company here, and they're local, right? You guys are in Calgary.
We are, yeah.
That's super exciting. So this is Nic Bieque. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, you got it pretty
Bake?
good. So,
Yeah, yeah.
it,
Okay. Well, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be on.
Yeah. So we typically start out these things by, I guess, asking about your journeys. What made you decide to? Because the whole sort of thesis of this podcast is entrepreneurship's tough, and we all wear all the hats. And this is a really for a lot of us a really painful, slogging journey with some great rewards at the end. So I'd love to hear when you decided, I'm going to try this out and started out on your entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, I think sometimes entrepreneurs, like whether it's by choice or not, is an interesting question on its own. But there's definitely like we are the kings and queens of delayed gratification sometimes. Or at least that's what we tell ourselves, right? We're just like, it will all be worth it. And then, you keep getting older and you're like, it will all be worth it, right?
I'll be worth it one day. One day. I
Um,
might steal that. The kings and queens of
right?
delayed gratification.
So for me, in terms of like on the quick personal level, I was actually born in Texas, but I moved to Montreal when I was 1 years old. So I really grew up French in Montreal. And then I moved to my dad worked in energy, so Calgary made a lot more sense than Montreal. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
moved to Calgary and I was in my teens. Fell in love with the place. That's actually when I started learning English, when I got into kind of computer programming and kind of started my own small businesses. But on a personal level, I like to say I'm a Texas French Canadian, and I speak none of the languages properly at this point. So
Yeah,
um,
that's all right. I don't know a Quebecer that does a real Parisian. Quebec has its own version of French. I could say that because I'm married to a Quebecer, and I just got back
yep.
from visiting my mother-in-law last week, and I actually learned Parisian French in elementary, like in grade school. And man, you get out to Quebec and it's a whole other thing, right? So
It
yeah,
really much is. I mean, they look at us the way that we look at kind of Australians or something. Like it's kind of like we're Quebec French is kind of like the slangy,
yeah,
different one, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I visited France a little while back, and like I could say one word, and then they automatically knew that they knew that I wasn't from there. So
Yeah, yeah. So you said you started your original businesses. So Helcim is what you got going on in Calgary now. We're going to get into
mhm.
that. What'd you start with? What was the first thing?
Yeah, I think I fell. So, I mean, I fell in love with computer programming and design. So, like, I was a bit weird. So, I was like, on one side, I was doing coding, and on the other side, I was doing, web design, 3D design, and like where the two's kind of smashed together is really around, and this is like the early 2000s, was really around like e-commerce. So, like, you would
Yeah.
build, websites on the design side, and then you would build the programming in the back end of them. And so my first, one of my first jobs was actually working at a local computer company here called Memory Express.
I know Memory
I
Express well. Yeah.
Right, and I mean that was the playground for computer geeks. You just go
Yeah.
there and build your own towers. And so I went to them. They had a static website, and I said I would love to build you guys an e-commerce website, because they had nothing at the time. They didn't have a configurator or anything like that. And they hired me. I was in high school. I worked there in my afternoons for $8 an hour, and I was, programming their their first e-commerce website and their first configurator. And when I delivered that, I kind of realized, hey, maybe that I can build a business doing this. And kind of I think there's part of me, I was never a great employee. I always wanted to
Mm,
kind of, there's you just kind of like you always it's fine working for clients, but you're still kind of like want to control your own, I don't know,
destiny and
exactly,
work
right? So
schedule. Yeah.
so my first company that I started, and it was at the end of high school, was really around web design. So, but it was more specifically around kind of really building e-commerce websites. So this is pre Shopify days. So, and pre WooCommerce or WordPress or anything. So you would start from scratch, and you would just
You're
start
coding.
coding yeah, you're
Yeah.
coding, and you're in old school PHP, and you're just building things for clients, and turn that into a business. And that's actually how that was the spark for ultimately how I got into payments, because as we were coding these e-commerce websites, there wasn't many payment options at the time. There was like Moneris, which is a pretty awful experience. You go to your bank and they'd be like, well, give us a $10,000 GIC deposits to open
Yeah.
an account with Moneris. Like, it was
Yeah.
really old school.
Yeah.
And or you had PayPal, which really wasn't, it wasn't. PayPal has never been great at any point of its history, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the spark was there, going like, oh, maybe there's something where I can start mixing this kind of e-commerce experience, this programming experience, with like allowing businesses to accept payments. And while that turned into like a more than a decade long story, it was the spark that kind of got me to where I am today.
Neat. Neat. Oh, that's great. So yeah, programmer backgrounds. Did you go to school for that, or were you all self-taught?
It was all self-taught.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when I went to school, I ended up getting a business degree because I was like, well, I already know computers. What do I not know? I don't know business. Let's go learn that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Yeah. Right on. And so what was the seed? What was the seed for Helcim? Like, where did that start?
yeah, so I mean, so that started over a decade ago, and the problem is that the banks, we learned very quickly that the banks were not going to give us access to the networks. Like, it was just,
Yeah.
I was in my mid-20s and I had a shaved head and I didn't look, like somebody, I didn't look very reputable. And they had no interest in like, oh yeah, here are the, nobody was like, oh yeah, here are the keys to the kingdom. Go ahead and build your own payments company. So we really, really struggled to find a partner. And ultimately, we talked to all the Canadian banks and nobody wanted to give us a time of day. And we actually we got introduced to US Bank, which is one of the large banks in the States they were opening their payments operations in Canada. They had heard about us through kind of the grapevines as we were trying to talk to other banks. And they said, hey, we have a reseller program. So essentially, like, you don't get to be a true payments company, but you kind of can white label some of our payment services and you can put your code on top. And ultimately, like, we had no options and we just said, yeah, sure, that sounds good. And that was, I mean, that was in the kind of like 2018 or 2008, 2009. So like well over a decade ago.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Right on. We're just coming up on 10 years now. So that's a long horizon. You're, yeah,
Or
15 years now for you, for 14.
yeah,
And so it
for sure.
started with, so the initial idea, and we'll talk about the metamorphosis. Like, we
Yeah.
should go through the metamorphosis of your experience there. But it started really as a payment plugin for an e-commerce payment platform for custom built websites.
That's exactly it, right?
Yeah.
And we would program e-commerce websites for companies, and then we'd have the payment side to plug it into them. And we started doing a lot of that. And we really took, it was funny is that we just took a very transparent, I mean, it's just the nature of who we were, but like we took a very transparent approach to the payments. We're like, we'll just be honest with the rates, because like there's always been a lot of like let's say like kind of dishonest approach to payment processing, like the hidden fees and the contracts and everything. And we're just like, well, that's not who we are. Plus, it's not, we're not going to do that to the clients we're building e-commerce for. So we'll create, really simple pricing. It'll be transparent, and nice little kind of easy back-end tools like a virtual terminal where they can punch in credit cards and just some stuff to like troubleshoot. And what we found is that people started becoming much more interested in that than they were in our e-commerce. And
Oh,
they're just
okay.
like, okay, yeah, no, the e-commerce is fine, but like I could really use payment services for this. And we like the fact that, it's transparent and it's super simple. So we were going like, okay, I think that might be more the business. And so we started growing our company, client after client, of just like pure payment services. And we built that over a decade.
Yeah.
It became the kind of, we call it Helcim 1.0. So we built a small little reputation, a few thousand clients of being just an honest, straightforward payment processor. We were reselling merchant services, but we were doing it with like an honest twist. But we always had this spark of like, we want to be our own payments company. We really want to get back to that e-commerce and be able to offer everything like A to Z and not be reselling somebody else's, because you're still reselling a bank, so there's still paperwork and it was still kind of convoluted. And
Right.
but
Right.
that took us almost a decade to be able to get to the size and level of relationships where we could actually go out on our own.
and be your own payment processor. I think
Exactly.
that likely resonates with a lot of listeners on this who have, payment processing. I still don't know what my payment processing actually costs. And I'm not going to talk about platforms or whatever. We'll save that for another one. But I know what I pay,
Yeah.
but I don't know if that's what it costs. And why not just be transparent about that? Like, why not? I think a lot of it probably comes to, particularly in credit card land, is this idea that we all need perks for using our credit cards. And it was interesting because I was at an Ignition Council event in Chicago last year, and Guy Pearce said, on the way from the airport, he's like, I can't believe all the billboards about, use this card, get the points and the travel reward points. Apparently that's not a thing through a lot of the world. That's a very North American thing to get all these rewards on cards. And you go, okay, well, I'm paying this premium so that I can have my points.
Yeah.
Right.
It's
And I'm not go ahead.
It's a super interesting dynamic, and even you think about it like in terms of like regulation, because there's other countries like Australia and Europe where regulators have put caps on interchange, and there's not enough revenue there for the banks to give back points, right? But when you think about the politics and those dynamics there, if you have 1 million merchants in Canada accepting card payments, but you have almost 40 million card holders, that are really enjoying their points. Like if you're aiming for votes as you think about regulation,
Sure.
where is that weight in terms of, so I think merchants are at a disadvantage when it comes to those dynamics.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I noticed I wasn't going to get into this until a bit later, but let's take a bit of an off ramp here, because something that's just happened in Canada, and I think it's happening in a lot of places in the States, is we can actually pass back our merchant fees legally now.
Yep.
And I think you have some thoughts on that, because that's about to hit, right? We're able to now. I haven't read the legislation, so please forgive me for pretending to be a lawyer, but the way I understand it is we can effectively just pass back our merchant charges to our customers and say that we're doing that. Whereas before you had to be sort of crafty with it. This is an admin fee or whatever, right? And now, you can just blatantly say, sure, you want to use your credit card, it's going to cost you 3% more or whatever.
It's one of those things
and
where
that's sort of emotional, right? And it's like, what, I have to buy my own points,
you have to kind of separate yourself from, or I have to separate myself of like, how do I feel as a consumer about it versus how businesses feel about it. So like me walking into a major grocery store chain, or I'm thinking about the telco companies that shall not be named, where they start charging that on your phone bill.
Yeah.
Like that's infuriating. Like it's just like it's you're already giving them your business. There's always already like duopolies and a lot of that in Canada, and you're just like you don't feel like you have options, right? So, but on the other side, like you have merchants going, these are expensive, and I need something to help me, right? So we actually built a product called Helcim Fee Saver. We just launched it, and essentially we were like, how do we make it so that we try to give options to both parties? So what we decided to do is we said it's really geared towards a lot of our merchants are like professional services and wholesale, a lot of like kind of invoicing and accounts receivable, right? So we said, okay, look, you have businesses that generally, they're selling a $10,000 service and the customer wants to pay by card, but they're like, hey, look, this is really expensive, but the customer really wants it. Like, how do you give that optionality? So we said, let's build a service. We call it Fee Saver. It's like one toggle and you turn it on. And what it does is it'll automatically pass the fees onto, like on the invoice, they'll say, online convenience fee or credit card processing fee or so on. But then they'll give and say to the customer, if you're going to pay by credit card, it's going to be an extra, let's say, 3%. It kind of adjusts based on the regulations in the card. And then, but it'll say, or you can pay by bank account. So we have that automatically built in through like a ACH in the US and EFT in Canada, and it'll be free. And then the merchant will be happy either way. Right. Yeah. And then it gives that offer, it gives choice. And I think choice is important. When you walk into the grocery store and you have no choice to buy your bread and it's like 3%, versus if you can give that customer and the merchant both them a choice and they're happy no matter what, now you've got something that might actually work. So
well, and it kind of goes back to what you said about earlier about so do you have a corporate vision at Helcim? What is it? I'm wondering if it's aligned with what where I'm
so
about
our
to
mission
down.
is to be the world's most loved payments company.
Right.
Which we
Right.
take we very much take to our very much believe it. It's a bit of an oxymoron in the payment
Yeah.
space because,
Yeah.
I mean, people just do not like their payments company, let alone love them. And we're really trying to change that dynamic.
Yeah. And one of the ways you've mentioned it in two different spots so far since we've been chatting is really just about creating transparency and understanding and open it up. Why not let everybody see what they're being charged, right? So, why not?
That's exactly
Um,
it.
yeah. And so when you give people the option of, how uh, they can pay, and it's going to be more to use your credit card or less to use your bank account, why not? So what was the growth of your team? So you started in 2009 ish. What was the trajectory there
Yeah.
where
So
you really started to hit your stride?
So the best way to look at us, now I'll keep this story short, but the best way to look at us is that you have the Helcim kind of 1.0 and a Helcim 2.0. So the 1.0
Okay.
was that original reseller business. We built it over a decade. We grew it to about 40 people in the team in Calgary. It was a profitable business. And we slowly built it, getting 2 clients and then 4 and then 8 and grew business as a reseller. But we knew we could become more. And it took many, many years of building the size and the relationship to be able to make that happen. And
Yeah.
finally, we got to a position where it's like we could become our own processor, our own payments company from scratch. And
Okay.
we decided we made that big pivot in the summer of 2020. So we're just 3 years in now, and that's the Helcim 2.0. We actually decided to keep the name because we had already built a little bit of a reputation as a good, honest processor, and that's hard to do in this space. And we're like, we're not throwing that away. We're keeping the name, even though the service was kind of net new. And that's when we really started offering our service A to Z. We really doubled down on everything we believed in, and we decided to build a service with like 3 core pillars. And it was really based on like when merchants are looking for a good payments company, what is it that's important to them? Number one, pricing, transparency, and affordability. That's super, super key. It really matters. It's a big cost of their business, and we think that that's how you build long-term relationships. Number two, amazing customer service. Again, it's your cash flow. If you're processing, a few $1,000s a month, it matters that you pick up the phone and you talk to somebody competent. And we found that a lot of fintechs sometimes saw customer service as like kind of like a nuisance to their growth, and we're like, no, we're gonna just like embrace that and make it like part of our pillar. And then
So
the
you've got
third
an army of people to pick up the phone. Am I hearing that
I
right?
mean, I wouldn't call it an army. It's but what we do is that our mindset towards customer service remains. It's not an afterthought. So like we
Yeah. Yeah.
hire
Yeah.
people that are local. We give them good wages. We make it a priority as part of like how we develop our software. We obviously want to use technology to scale, but it's always like there are moments that need to be very human and never forget it. Right? It's
Yeah.
really kind of like the
Yeah.
mindset. And then the
Yeah.
third pillar of bringing all the service together is like, let's take a digital first approach. So this is where the if you start looking at the kind of like I'll call them legacy old school processors that are owned by the banks, you sign up today and it's still pretty cumbersome, and it looks like the stuff was built in the 1990s and it's still
And
like
you got to leave a ten
PDFs
thousand
and
dollar deposit, and
exactly right. So
yeah.
we're just like, no, we're gonna make it like instant self-service, all these great digital tools built in, and we really saw ourselves like nobody's bringing those 3 things together: transparency, great customer service, digital first. We're gonna be that processor that when people discover, go, where have you been all my life? Like, and ultimately tie it to that mission.
Yeah, right on, right on. And so, where are we now in the timeline? Are we 2013, 2014,
No, so that's 2020 when we did that
2020? Okay.
yeah, when
Yeah.
that pivot. So that's like the new Helsum. And to give you a
Yep.
scale of it, so that we went from 40 people to we're now 150.
Holy
Um,
man.
yeah, so
Yeah.
so I mean it was really by us becoming our own payments company and no longer being a reseller, we could really start driving growth and an experience that we knew was going to be like really successful with our merchants.
So would you say that I talk a lot about being mission focused and mission centered and how that's going to help your growth. Let's just get really focused in on what you want to do. And I noticed there that you tied, we had our 3 pillars and then the growth, right?
Yeah,
And so, because I think a lot of business owners, um, we get stuck in this loop of, okay, well, I'm just going to take on whatever and I'll fill sort of all the needs that are coming at me because I need to make money. But as soon as you get focused in on what you're really good at and offer something to the market that they can't easily find somewhere else. Like that's, you 3-4x your staff, right? So
Yeah. It's one of those things where you it's a really, really hard lesson because when you're first starting as an entrepreneur, you're so hungry that the idea of saying no is like,
mm,
and you almost don't want to at that stage, right? Like you're just trying to figure it out. You're trying to understand what works, what doesn't. And like sometimes saying a lot of yeses and biting off more
mhm,
than you can chew is how you learn and how you ultimately like kind of find yourself in your process. But at a certain point, you need to go, you need to have that haha moment of like what you want to be when you grow up and then
mhm,
start saying no to everything else.
yeah,
And for us, I think a big part of it was there's a lot of payments companies out there. You have I'll name a few in terms of like, say, Square is really good at micro merchants, right? Like in terms of like a quick order restaurant or a farmer's market, and that's
mhm,
a need in the market, and they do really well there. And then like the Stripes of the world on the other end of the spectrums are more like if you're a Shopify, you're a large startup that has a marketplace or something like that, Stripe might be the partner for you, right?
mhm,
But what we discovered is like, who are we really good at servicing? And we realized that we were really great, quote unquote, traditional SMBs, like
mhm,
doctors and chiros and accountants and wholesalers, and we felt like they were being really ignored by even the new kind of fintechs, like
mhm,
they're such a huge part of the industry. They're like the heartbeat of our local communities and economies, but they were kind of stuck with the kind of old school processors. And we're
yeah.
like, we can be really good at that. And when we started saying no to everything else and start saying yes to those and then doubling down, that's when we start seeing things finally click.
Yeah. And there's a couple capital raises in there, I imagine?
Yeah, so we were a little bit of a unique business is that because we had built the first kind of the 1.0 on our own over a 10-year
Mhm.
period, we had kind of funded, we were kind of like our own seed investor to that big pivot.
Okay.
So, all
Nice.
those investments we made. So, but it got to a point, so we launched on our own. We were just like a bootstrap company. And it
Yeah.
got to a point where it was actually my CFO, Marge, who was wonderful. And she came into my office in the fall of 2021 and
Mhm.
essentially told me, she's like, this bootstrap thing is done. we we pushed it as far as we could. This business is really starting to take off. We're gonna need like investors with deeper pockets to like help us keep up with this thing. If not, we're just gonna choke
Yeah.
the business.
Yeah.
And we had never
Yeah.
raised capital before, so it was a little intimidating. You hear the stories
Sure.
about like bad VCs and taking
Ugh.
bad deals and
Yeah.
so, so we went out and reached out to, I reached out to other CEOs in the tech space, and especially Calgary's got this cool kind of underdog mentality of like everybody wants to help each other out, and like we show
Sure.
the world we can do this right here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
Same in the
just
beer
went
scene, by the way. It's the same in
right,
the tech scene and the beer scene in Calgary are just beautiful. Yeah.
and everybody wants to help out everybody else, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I literally asked, I'm like, how do you raise money from venture capitalists? How do you put a deck together? How do you pitch? And we learned how to do that. And ultimately, we just over a year ago in the spring of 2022, we raised a Series A. We raised 16 million bucks from investors, just wonderful investors out of Toronto and New York, and that's really helped us kind of like you just kind of propel our growth.
Yeah. Sure. We're I host a 3 to 5 club CEO mastermind at my office here for a few, and this month we're talking about, how, we're talking about cash flow and
Mm,
understanding your cash flow and collecting faster. And it came up about growth and how growth, you go through your stages of your relationships with your P&L and your cash and everything. And once you get to this stage that you just talked about, this growth stage, it's like that's a really scary stage. Particularly, you've been sort of doing it for a decade, it sounds like, internally financing this whole,
mhm.
build up. And you hit it right on the head, which is if you're growing too fast, excuse me, and you're undercapitalized, that can be scary, right? Because you can run out of cash fast. Growth is very expensive, right?
Yep.
So yeah, yeah, it's super interesting to watch the ebbs and flows of business. You go, hey, I got all these sales happening in a lineup of new
Yeah.
business, and yet I have no cash in the bank. Why is that? Well, you need to hire new people, you need to build new systems, and the new programmer and the CFO, and
Yeah.
all the
And
things that cost money, right?
it's one of those things where like I think the advice I wish I had learned earlier was that there's different types of capitals for different types of businesses in phases, and
Hmm.
we can, I can, there's pros and cons to all types of capitals, whether that's private equity or debt financing or venture capital or loans from the bank or whatever is the case. But they do have their place. They each have their place in the market, and it's important for you to understand, like, what does your business actually need? What kind of capital does your business actually like? Where are you actually at? And I think I didn't know that when I was, a few years back, and I was like, you end up wasting too much time talking to the wrong people and not
Yeah.
knowing like what you're
Yeah.
trying to do. And ultimately, when you have that haha moment of like, okay, this is how their model works, and this is the type of business you are, and there's the alignment. You're like, okay, that's what I
Yeah.
need.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. What else would you say through what are your big aha moments that if you'd have just known it from square one, you could have just leapfrogged a couple of years of learning, right?
I'll give you two. The first amazing advice I got from a Canadian expat. Dave McJanet, who's the CEO of a tech company in California, and he said, "No, your job as like a top executive is to always identify which phase your business is at." And he'll say, because a lot of times you'll get great advice, wrong phase. So you'll
Mhm.
read a book. So I'll give you an example. Like you're trying to figure out how to build a customer service team, and you'll pick up a book on it, and there's all these great examples, and this is how you build it, and then you try it and it falls apart, and you're like, what happened? Right? And you
Mhm.
get really
Mhm.
frustrated, and it took 6 months on, and then, but if you step back and be like, maybe that was the right advice, but it was for the wrong phase of your business. Like your business
Mhm.
wasn't big enough to kind of incorporate these kind of processes. So I think that it's always like, what phase are you in right now, and match the advice to that phase. Because a lot of times, if people will be like, oh, well, I did this and I did that and this worked and this didn't, but they might have been they might have been much smaller than you, or they might have been much bigger than you, and
Mhm.
no matter how good you try to execute on it, it will not work. So
Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah.
like identifying what phase your business is at, and then matching the advice and the
I,
execution to it.
I love that. For years, we tried to. I was reading all these, Alan Mulally saves Ford. I'm going. That book's called American Icon, by the way. It's a good
Yeah.
one. But if it's like, okay, I'm going to read about how Alan Mulally saved Ford in 2006 and try and apply some of that to my business. And all I actually needed to do was hire more people
Right.
for things to start working properly, right? And so, you go, hey, we're going to execute all this, and everybody's going, no, we don't have time for any of that,
Yeah.
right? So
That's
we weren't
exactly
at
it.
the right place.
Right
Yeah,
advice, wrong phase, right? So,
yeah, yeah.
and
So
then
what's number two?
number two would be one way to kind of, I found that to kind of not cut corners, maybe kind of skip some of the hard lessons, I call them tuition, the hard tuition payments that is sometimes a 30-minute conversation with somebody that's done it will give you so much insight. So for example, we are scaling out I'll give you a more kind of specific example. So we're scaling out we have a fraud and risk team. So, we are a financial service. We have fraudsters applying to us. We have merchants that are getting over their skis, and we're constantly monitoring our transactions and making sure that we're protecting ourselves and protecting our merchants. And so we've grown an organization. It's gone to over a dozen. But now I'm going like, what's next? How do I build this org structure further, right? And so what I do now, whenever I start running into these questions, and it is I go, who's done it? And I go to my network and I go like, hey, have say somebody that's worked at Square, somebody that used to work at Wave, or name a business, or it could be in the same industry, it could be something else, right? And be like, can I
Mm-hmm.
get an intro? Can I pick
Mm-hmm.
somebody's brain for 30 minutes? And people are actually pretty open with intros.
Yeah.
And then I usually go in with a pretty specific question. Like, for example, I'm trying to build a org structure for this department. I have no idea what it looks like. I have no idea how what they should be focused on, what kind of talent I should be looking at, so on. How did you guys go about it? And then I just write a million notes
Mm-hmm.
for what I can get. And you do that with like a dozen people, and all of a sudden you can look back and you can see some patterns. And sometimes it's actually like, oh, we actually are going in the right direction. Maybe the imposter syndrome is, overweighted right now. Or sometimes
Yeah.
like, oh my God, this makes a ton of sense. And it would have taken us 3 hires and 5 different attempts to try to like get to this.
Mm-hmm.
And you're seeing the repeating patterns. So I'm a lot more comfortable at asking now, like, I don't, not pretending I know everything, because I absolutely don't. I've only built a business as big as it is today. and
Yeah, yeah.
and then not being shy to just go ask for, and it doesn't have to be a whole afternoon of brainstorming. It could just usually 30 minutes, and we'll give you some pretty cool insights. And you do that with a half a dozen people, and all of a sudden you come out on the other end, and it's like, I've got a direction and I'm going to go
Mhm.
try something.
Are you into zero NQBO?
We are into Zero and QBO. So what we did is we actually built a great partnership with Zero late last year. So
Yeah, I saw that one.
yeah, and
Yeah.
essentially what it came from is that they were really looking to kind of offer more options to their customers, and they were looking for something really specific, which is essentially a payment facilitator, which is a fancy term in the industry for somebody that can kind of like instantly deliver the service, right? That
Mhm.
can do interchange plus pricing. Again, getting into terminology, but essentially like that's the type of credit card pricing structure we do, which is a lot more transparent and affordable.
Yeah.
And that had a great
As
reputation in
opposed to
Canada.
what, flat rate?
Flat rates,
Yeah.
exactly, like like
Sure. Okay.
the 2.9% kind of thing, right? So they're
Yeah.
like, so a kind of digital first processor, interchange plus pricing, great reputation, great customer service. um well, there's really Helcim. So they kind of finally landed on, they're like, okay, you're the one we've been looking for, and we just made a partnership with them in late last year in
Mhm.
cross Canada US. We're super excited. We're starting to build that out. So we've really worked on uh, bringing our zero integration to like the best it can be. And now it's just like, we're so proud of it, like the simple little wizard, and it does even reconciles the fees on the other side. Like it's
Nice.
super
Yeah,
super
that is
slick. We're
great.
super happy with it. And but then we're like, okay, well, let's go build out a ton of relationships with accounting partners and bookkeepers. And the feedback we got is like, love what you guys built. Why don't you guys put that level of effort on your QBO side? And we're like, got it. Okay, good feedback. So that's the next evolution that we want to do in the second half of this year, is like, we have a
Okay.
basic integration. It doesn't have the same tender love and care and precision as the Zero one.
Mhm.
But we've learned so much from it. We want to bring on both sides. So yeah,
Right
it's
on.
part of the
Is
journey.
is that the main way that is that going to be, do you foresee that being the main way that private companies like my customers are going to find you, is through these integrations? Or are they out searching, am I searching for what integrates well with Zero, or am I searching for, I need a simple payment processor? Like, how are people finding you, and what's my quickest path to finding you?
Yeah, I mean, for us, the quickest path to finding us is like doing Google searches. So like a small
Yeah.
business, whether that's a dentist or a plumbing parts wholesaler, is going like, I've got a problem. I need to accept credit card payments. What are my options? I guess there's Square. I guess there's Stripes. I guess there's an old school bank. I don't feel so good about any of those. And then all of a sudden
Hmm.
they discover us, and whether that's search SEO and review websites and so on. And then we really try to create our website so that what we have in mind is that if you're a small business owner and it's like 11 p.m. on a Saturday night, can you get everything you can out of this website and have enough trust and information that you can sign up instantly?
And
And
then
like
go in the
that's why,
next
like,
morning. Yeah.
exactly, right? So that, like, the rates are on the website, the information's on the website, the sign up can be self-service. Like, I hate,
Yeah, your
as you're a small
website's
business
great.
owner. Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
we've worked very hard on it.
Your website's
Um,
great. I'm on it right now.
many
It's awesome.
many iterations. It's probably
I
version
bet.
22 at this point.
I
So,
bet.
but it's our biggest sales rep, right? And
Yeah.
because I hate, as a small business owner, when you're looking for a service provider and you're like, okay, this might do it for me, but you're like, ugh, I got to call to get any information, or like, I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
get thrown onto a sales rep and they're just gonna give me the rate of the day as opposed to actually like telling me how much this thing actually is going to cost me. And so we're
Mm-hmm.
like, no, no,
Yeah.
no, let's make it so that like our team is there if you call them to talk to them, but like, let's just make it so that merchants can just like, they can open up Moneris's website, PayPal's website, our website, and be like, okay, this is the one, and
Yeah.
kind of go.
It
So
seems, I mean, you're on iteration 20 plus, but it does seem so simple, doesn't it? Like
yeah,
just do the great website from the beginning. But it's wild how long it takes to iterate. We're constantly dealing with iterations on ours too. Yours is fabulous. And I see you're doing recurring pricing, so I can put people on subscriptions, and you can actually do not inventory management.
yep. There's a
Yeah.
point of sale system and a card present a component
Yeah.
to it. So yeah,
Yeah, that's pretty great.
one thing we try to do with the website is, and it actually comes from, I think, the fact that English is my second language. Like, I've been speaking it enough now that I feel obviously pretty comfortable with it, but um, I think it made me a good copywriter because it forced me to use something that was like simpler words, simpler language, straight to the
Mm,
point.
mm.
And even as my English got better, I kind of retained that. And that's why I trained my team. I'm like, just pretend you're explaining it to your aunt. She's great. She's starting a business. She's not super tech savvy. Like, just write the copy and the websites and the headlines and everything
For your aunt.
for your aunt. And they're like, okay,
Yeah.
got
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. That's what anytime we're doing something for our customers here, I say, well, my grandpa's got to be able to use it. So,
Right,
yeah,
exactly.
let's keep it that simple. Last question, and then I'll let you go. I mean, you'd mentioned some huge growth in people.
Yep.
You've got a lot of, and I personally, I love adding people to the team. It's kind of neat. You go, okay, we collectively are putting food on everybody's table, and it's really neat, right? I get a huge reward coming in and seeing when more people work with us, and that's fabulous, right? It's really great. And so how do you at 150, like we're 18 to 20 depending on the day, 150, I mean, how do you keep your culture alive, and what kinds of things are you doing differently from when you were at 40 compared to when you're at 150?
Yeah, it was. Everybody warned me that the 100 mark gets really tough because that's when you stop knowing everybody and you stop knowing even people's names. Like you run somebody in the elevator and you're like, I know you work here, but I don't know who you are,
Oof.
right?
Yeah,
But then you're really trying to create this like super special place, and how do you bring the two together? So we did a couple things. So um, we were super intentional about like figuring out our culture. And I know it's easier said than done, but if you go to helcim.com/the way, so just one word, the way,
I'm on it.
um, and so we decided to make our culture book public. And so anybody, and we put on all our job postings, and we really get people to kind of consume it. And the way we look at it is like culture is a little bit like a flavor of ice cream, is that every company is a little bit different, but the problem is that you don't always know what you're going to get until you're there.
Mhm.
And when you go get ice cream, you get a sample, and that's great. And you're like, you know what, I don't like the mango one, but I like strawberry or whatever, right? So for us, we're like, let's really show the everyone up front what kind of flavor of ice cream we are before they start with us, because some people are not going to resonate with it, but the people that like this flavor are really going to like it. So first of all, that helps bringing the right people in the door, because you lose control at this size. You lose control. Like you can't be in every interview, so you're really hoping that like the right talent's being attracted. And then communication. So we do. I started something during the pandemic, and it was just as a way to try to keep the team together. We were about 40 people at the time, so it was much smaller. But I started something. This is the geeky side of me, called the daily captain's log, and it was essentially the kind of like the Picard style, you know, captain's log. This day, this is what happened. And during the pandemic, it was just to keep the team motivated, and like, here's what we talked to, and here's what we think's happening, and so on. So we
Yeah,
turned that into a weekly newsletter that I write once a week now, or the other
cool.
executives help me write. And essentially, it's
Nice.
like a super candid, like, here's what's happening, here's what's the top of mind. And it's just, but initiatives like that are like so crucial when you get to a certain size where you can't have a one-on-one conversation with everyone.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things that we started doing, and we do, a monthly town hall with the whole company. We get everybody in the room, and part of our policy there is we say anybody can ask any question. We do a Q&A at the end, and every question will be answered, no matter how spicy. And
Mhm.
so just like that, really
How
continued
much did you
trans.
make last year,
You
Nicholas? Yeah, yeah,
know what? No
yeah,
one's asked that one yet, but I've
yeah, yeah.
had people ask about, unions or some like,
Sure.
spicy topics like that. And we don't, we tell them when we don't, we're not aligned with like, a certain decision or a certain whatever, but just like being like, you know what, like, let's keep that level of transparency alive.
Mhm.
You just have to commit to it as you keep scaling. If not, you're going to lose that specialness that you're trying to create.
Good ideas. I'm probably going to use a lot of the stuff that I've learned in this one. I want to thank you so much for popping on and having this chat with me. I think a lot of people are going to find it very helpful. How do we find you and find your product, Helcim, and where should we look for it? And all that.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored. And
Mm. Well, thank you.
in terms of having for the website, it's helcim.com, HELCIM.com.
Mm.
Merchants can find us there, or just search for best payments company on Google, and you'll land on us. So And then in terms of for myself, I have a policy for myself, which is like I accept every LinkedIn request. So just,
Okay.
Nic Bieque, find me on LinkedIn and send me a message, and I'm happy to chat.
Yeah, right on. I can confirm that your LinkedIn feed is an interesting place to be for a while too. So, yeah, I appreciate it.
Appreciate that.
Appreciate it very much, Nic. I look forward to we'll have to catch up for a lunch or a pint soon and wrap more on
And
payments
come
for
for a
small
tour of the
business.
office. I don't think you've visited our
Yes.
offices yet. So come
No,
for
I haven't.
see, like it's 150 people. The median age is 29 years old. So it's a bunch of like super young, driven, Calgarians. It's fun to
Nice.
see. So yeah, come by. We'll
Yeah, yeah, I'd love to do that. I appreciate that very much. Okay,
we'll
sounds good.